In this episode, I'll be covering the conflict between the Grape Street, Watts Crips, and the East Coast Crips. Watts is a neighborhood on the east side of South Central Los Angeles, known for its cultural significance and history. It has been featured in films like Training Day, Imperial Dreams, and Menace to Society. The area is recognized for the 1965 Watts riots, the iconic Watts Towers, and popular eateries like Hawkins House of Burgers and the now-closed Jordan's Cafe, which was renowned for its soul food. However, Watts is also home to some of Los Angeles' most infamous gangs, including the Grape Street, Watts Crips. Origins of the Grape Street Crips. Grape Street originally formed as Barrio Grape, consisting of both Black and Latino members. However, in the early 1970s, the Black members formed the Jordan Downs Crips, and by the late 1970s, they transitioned into the Grape Street Crips. The Latino members remained Watts Barrio Grape and later became South Side Watts Barrio Grape 13, while the Black members became East Side Grape Street Watts Crips. Despite this split, the two gangs still share the same territory, the same enemies, and remain close allies to this day. The Grape Street Crips have dominated the Jordan Downs projects and the surrounding streets for over 40 years. They have numerous cliques, including Dusttown Hogs, Parolees, 103rd Street, Peter Row Mafia, many others. Origins of the East Coast Crips. The East Coast Crips are a gang spread throughout the east side of South Central Los Angeles and beyond. They formed throughout the late 1970s and 1980s. Many of the gangs that later became East Coast sets existed before joining the Alliance, such as the 69 Shack Boys and the Q102 Town Street Boys. It is said that Crips founder Raymond Washington formed the East Coast Crips because he wanted to reunify the fractured East Side Crips, which he originally established in 1969. There have been many theories regarding the origin of the East Coast Crips name. Some say it's because the East Coast sets resemble a coastline, while others believe East Coast was just another way of saying East Side. However, no theory has been fully validated, and much first-hand knowledge has been lost over time. The East Coast Crips are comprised of several sets, including First Street, originally located in the Aliso Village projects in Boyle Heights, but later displaced due to law enforcement pressure, wars with surrounding gangs, and demographic changes. They are still active and are considered a nomadic gang. The First Street to Q102 sets are considered East Coast neighborhood Crips, while the 118 to 1200 block sets are known as East Coast Block Crips. The brotherhood between Grape Street and East Coast. For decades, the Grape Street Crips and the East Coast Crips maintained a strong alliance. It was common to see Grape Street members hanging out in East Coast neighborhoods and vice versa. The two gangs would attend each other's hood days and even organize football games against each other. But on one fateful night, everything changed. The night that started the war. On Saturday, January 26, 2008, members of both Grape Street and East Coast attended a party at a rented hall on Florence Avenue. By all accounts, the night started off well. There was food, drinks, music, and an atmosphere of celebration. However, as the night progressed, tensions escalated. Around 1 a.m., an argument broke out between East Coast and Grape Street members. Moments later, a gun was drawn. Instantly, more guns were pulled, and chaos erupted as gunfire was exchanged. The venue descended into complete chaos as partygoers ran for their lives. When the smoke cleared, 6 people had been shot. Among them was 25-year-old Brandon Bullard, who was transported to a nearby hospital. Tragically, he was pronounced dead upon arrival. This tragic event would mark the beginning of one of the bloodiest wars in Los Angeles gang history, retaliation and escalation of violence. Brandon was a beloved member of Grape Street, known by the nicknames BL and BZ. Although he was only 25 years old, he was viewed as a leader by other Grape Street members. Among those shot that night was also 17-year-old Bruce Adams, another well-respected Grape Street member who went by the nickname Tanky. Bruce was transported to the hospital and treated for his wounds. Detectives were already familiar with Brandon and knew the status he held within Grape Street, which put them on edge. A few years prior, Brandon had been shot in the face by a Bounty Hunter Bloods member, an incident that intensified an already deadly rivalry, leading to back-to-back shootings and multiple murders. Immediate retaliation by Grape Street. Just a few hours after Brandon's murder, Grape Street members stormed into multiple East Coast territories, opening fire on well-known hangouts. In one of these shootings, a man named Ezell Ford was struck in the leg while standing on 66th Street between Broadway and Grand Avenue, an area controlled by the 66 East Coast Crips. 12 hours after Brandon's murder, around 1 p.m., 22-year-old Mario Proctor was standing on the front porch of a residence on 101st Street in the Jordan Downs projects, talking with his friend Rashad. Shortly afterward, a black Chevy Impala with tinted windows slowly drove down the street, passing by them. About a minute later, the Impala returned, this time stopping near where Mario and Rashad were standing. A man exited the front passenger seat and immediately opened fire, firing approximately 17 shots. Rashad was struck in the hand but survived. Mario was struck in the leg, arm, and head. Mario was transported to a nearby hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 1:30 p.m. He was a beloved member of Grape Street, known by the nickname Gus. Detectives arrived at the scene and began their investigation. The Jordan Downs projects have numerous surveillance cameras, and investigators were able to retrieve footage from a nearby location. The video showed the Impala driving down 101st Street, making a U-turn and heading toward Mario and Rashad. With a description of the vehicle, detectives arrested a suspect 2 days later, Daniel Colden, who owned a black Chevy Impala with tinted windows. Shortly after Daniel's arrest, police arrested another suspect, Cedric Johnson. During a search of Cedric's apartment, investigators found numerous items indicating his affiliation with the East Coast Crips, including gang-related pictures, papers with gang writing, a printout from the Los Angeles Times homicide blog detailing Brandon's murder. Both Daniel and Cedric admitted to being members of the East Coast Crips. Incriminating evidence and trial. Daniel and Cedric were placed in monitored jail cells, where their conversations and phone calls were recorded. Both men made statements indicating that they were in the Impala at the time of the shooting. In one conversation, Daniel admitted to being the driver of the car. In another, he revealed that his mother had disposed of the murder weapon for him. Charges and sentencing. Daniel Colden and Cedric Johnson were charged with first-degree murder for the killing of Mario Proctor, attempted murder for shooting Rashad, gun and gang enhancement charges. During the trial, the prosecutor presented the following key evidence. Recorded jail conversations were played for the jury. Surveillance footage of Daniel's Impala on 101st Street was shown. A gang investigator testified about the rivalry between Grape Street and East Coast and how Daniel and Cedric were active participants in the gang war, seeking out rival Grape Street members in Jordan Downs. Ultimately, both Daniel Colden and Cedric Johnson were found guilty of the murder of Mario Proctor, the attempted murder of Rashad, gun and gang-related charges. Both men were sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Another retaliation, the murder of Van Knott. The day after Mario's murder, on January 28th, around 8:45 a.m., 19-year-old Van Knott was talking to a friend on 97th Street when a Dodge Charger pulled up. Without warning, someone inside the vehicle opened fire. Van was hit multiple times in the chest and rushed to a hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The shooting took place in 97 East Coast territory, and investigators believe it was Grape Street's retaliation for Mario's murder. On January 28th, around 9:30 p.m., 36-year-old Chantel Johnson was at his clothing store located on the corner of Broadway and 99th Street. Shortly afterward, someone opened fire into the store, striking Chantel and 2 other people. The 2 others survived, but Chantel was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators believe Grape Street was responsible. The war between Grape Street and East Coast Crips continued throughout the following weeks and months. 2 gangs that were once close had become bitter enemies. The murder of Kewin Bullard. On March 18, 2008, at around 10:20 p.m., 23-year-old Kewin Bullard was involved in an altercation at a popular skating rink called Skate Depot, located in Cerritos. During the altercation, someone pulled out a gun and opened fire, striking Kewin. Officers patrolling the area heard the gunshots and rushed to the scene. When they arrived, they found Kewin lying on the ground. Kewin was transported to a hospital, but at 1:08 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Kewin was the younger brother of Brandon and had just spoken at Brandon's funeral a few weeks prior. He was a beloved Grape Street member, known by the nickname Tweeter. Investigators believe the East Coast Crips were responsible for his murder. The death of Bruce Adams. On April 12, 2008, Bruce Adams, the 17-year-old who had been shot alongside Brandon at the party on Florence Avenue, was pronounced dead due to complications from his injuries. The 70th Street shooting. On August 25, 2008, around 5:30 p.m., 3 vehicles, including a blue Jeep Cherokee, drove down Main Street and stopped on 70th Street. At the time, a party was taking place at a residence on 70th Street, with about 20 people gathered outside. Among them were Deshauna, her friend Cassandra, Kevin, who was walking around the neighborhood pushing his 6-year-old brother Robert in a toy car, 55-year-old Leroy Smith, Kevin's stepfather. Shortly afterward, a man exited the blue Jeep with a rifle and opened fire on the group. The partygoers ran for cover as the shooter fired between 20 and 40 rounds in rapid succession. After the shooting, the man returned to the Jeep and all 3 vehicles fled the scene. When the smoke cleared, for people had been shot: Deshauna, Kevin, 6-year-old Robert, Leroy Smith. Deshauna, Kevin, and Robert survived, but Leroy was transported to a hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The shooting took place in 6 to 9 East Coast territory, and investigators began their investigation immediately. Arrest and trial of Randall Coleman. After speaking with witnesses and gathering vehicle descriptions, detectives suspected Randall Coleman was the shooter. Randall was a well-known Grape Street member, known by the nickname Gooby. Police had multiple interactions with Randall in the past, during which he admitted to being a Grape Street member. Both Deshauna and Cassandra later identified Randall in a photographic lineup. Randall Coleman was arrested and charged with first-degree murder for the death of Leroy Smith, attempted murder for shooting Deshauna, Kevin, and Robert, gun and gang enhancement charges. Randall later pleaded not guilty. Key evidence against Randall Coleman. On October 3, 2008, police officers were patrolling Jordan Downs when they saw a Grape Street member named Ricky standing on the sidewalk with a rifle. Ricky ran, throwing the rifle under a parked car as officers chased him through the projects. Police arrested Ricky and recovered the rifle, which was the same rifle used in the 70th Street shooting. During the trial, the prosecution presented the following key evidence. Deshauna and Cassandra both identified Randall as the shooter. Multiple police officers testified about their past interactions with Randall, during which he admitted being a Grape Street member. Randall had been previously arrested while riding in a blue Jeep, matching the vehicle description from the shooting. LAPD officer Samuel Morello, a gang expert, testified about the ongoing war between Grape Street and East Coast Crips. He stated that the shooting was carried out to benefit the Grape Street Crips. The defense argument. The defense claimed that Randall was not the shooter and had an alibi. They presented multiple witnesses, including Randall's mother, Tracy, who testified that she dropped him off at Wanisha's house at 11:30 a.m. and saw him there again at 5 p.m. Wanisha, Randall's girlfriend, who stated he arrived at her house between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. and did not leave for a significant amount of time. However, she admitted she did not watch him the entire time. Randall's cousin Michael and neighbor Shavana, both of whom testified that Randall was on the porch at the time of the shooting. Douglas Compton, a 6 to 9 East Coast member, who testified that Randall was not the shooter. Despite these testimonies, DeShawna was called back to the stand due to inconsistent statements she had given about the shooter's height and weight. She also initially told police that a man named Douglas Taylor was at the party that day, but later retracted her statement. Verdict and sentencing. Ultimately, Randall Coleman was found guilty of the murder of Leroy Smith, the attempted murders of DeShawna, Kevin, and Robert, gun and gang enhancement charges. Randall Coleman was sentenced to 173 years to life in prison. The Compton train station incident. On September 23, 2008, 20-year-old DeBrew Smith was at a Compton train station with his girlfriend Jacqueline and his best friend Terry Dozier. DeBrew was a member of the 8 to 9 East Coast Crips. Shortly afterward, two people approached DeBrew, warning him about a Grape Street member nearby. A few minutes later, 17-year-old Richard Robertson walked past DeBrew. DeBrew recognized Richard as the Grape Street member he had been warned about. DeBrew caught up with Richard, and the two began to argue. They separated, and Richard called someone on his cell phone. Jacqueline urged DeBrew to walk away, but he initially refused, saying, "If he's going to call his people, I'm going to call mine." However, after a few moments, he agreed to leave and began walking away. Shortly afterward, DeBrew's cousin, Tana, joined them. DeBrew was pacing back and forth on the platform, while Richard stood nearby, talking on his phone. As DeBrew walked off the platform, Richard ran after him, making derogatory statements about him and the East Coast Crips. Tanner offered to fade Richard, which means a fistfight, but Richard declined and stated, "When my homies get here, there ain't gonna be no fading." DeBrew was on parole and didn't want to fight, but he again refused to leave the area. A short while later, a black Chevy Tahoe pulled up to the train station. 3 women and a man named Ronald Brim exited the vehicle. Minutes later, another man named Leo Lloyd Adams arrived at the train station in a champagne-colored car. Richard said, "It's going down," and pointed out DeBrew's group to Ronald. Ronald reached through the front passenger window of Leo's car, pulled out a rifle, cocked it, and opened fire. The train station was in chaos as the rush hour crowd ran and hid for cover. Ronald fired at least 12 shots before returning to the Tahoe, which then fled the scene. 3 bystanders were struck, but survived. DeBrew and his best friend, Terry, were both shot while running away, and both men died at the scene. Detectives arrived and began their investigation. The black Tahoe and the champagne-colored car had been captured on surveillance video at the train station. Ronald was arrested for drunk driving, and an officer identified his Tahoe as the one involved in the shooting. Jacqueline and another bystander picked Richard out of a photographic lineup. Leo was arrested in 2010. He owned a gold Pontiac similar to the champagne-colored car involved in the shooting. Cell phone records indicated that phones registered to Ronald and Leo were used near the train station at the time of the shooting and traveled away afterward. Records also showed that Ronald called Leo's phone immediately before the shooting. Leo Lloyd Adams, Ronald Brim, and Richard Robertson were all charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of DeBrew Smith and Terry Dozier. They were also charged with the attempted murders of 3 bystanders, as well as gun and gang enhancement charges. Richard was a minor at the time, so his case was handled through the juvenile court system. Ultimately, Leo Lloyd Adams was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, and 3 life sentences with the possibility of parole, plus 125 years in prison. Ronald Brim was sentenced to death. 6 years after being wounded by Grape Street members on Monday, August 11, 2014, Azell Ford was shot and killed by LAPD officers. The LAPD's version of events was that officers observed Azell walking down the street and believed he might have been carrying a weapon or drugs. The officers exited their vehicle and attempted to stop him, but he didn't follow their orders or show his hands. The officers then took him to the ground. While Azell was on his stomach and an officer was on his back, Azell allegedly began reaching for the officer's gun. The officer drew his backup firearm and shot Azell 3 times. Witnesses told a different version of events. They said those officers were familiar with Azell and knew he was mentally ill, but still regularly harassed him. They also stated that Azel was already subdued when he was shot. Azel's death sparked numerous protests throughout Los Angeles. Brandon's memory still lives on within Grape Street. Members can often be heard saying "on busy" in reference to Brandon. The term has become so ingrained among Grape Street members that even younger ones who never knew Brandon use it. Members also nicknamed the parking lot near Brandon's old unit in the Jordan Downs busy line and throw parties there from time to time in his memory. These are just a few of the incidents that have taken place between the Grape Street, Watts Crips, and the East Coast Crips over the years. Many anti-gang organizations and community leaders have attempted to orchestrate a peace treaty between the gangs, but so far, none have been successful. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe.